I think, you see, the thing with Dad that I realised over the years is that the man and the music weren't separate. Like, so, you know, a lot of people will say he thought a lot about music, and he did, but he thought an awful lot about people and place, history, you know, and his own experience. And that was all one thing. He couldn't separate any of that. So I could listen to the albums from the first one to the last one and describe what was going on in his life at the time, and I can hear it in his music, if you understand me.
Well, that was kind of my impression when I heard him first, you know, on our recording. Like, this is crazy, you know. And my thing was, you know, if you were to learn a tune, you know, where do you start? You know, that was the big thing. I mean, there's a lot of recordings, there's a lot of commercial recordings, there's a lot of, you know, maybe home recordings or people that would have recorded them at concerts or whatever down through the years that I would have been listening to, and in many different scenarios, be it with the Bothy Band or with, you know, the Kilfenora Ceilidh Band, or with just maybe Matt Malloy, or I don't know, there's just umpteen, and a never endless supply of all those recordings, and to me they're just all so. And then the ones where he's playing on his own, even without accompaniment, they're just gems, you know, gems.
Once I seen Matt Peoples on the cover of the vinyl record at the time, I think it was sometime in the 80s when I discovered this record. I was a bit behind the times that way. Like, there was a whole lot of recording, even the Bothy. I didn't even know about the Bothy Band 75 recording until about 84. And it was Mike Butler who, he says, "Have you not heard that?" I says, "No." He went and bought me a copy. We were on tour with Cultus at the time, and he stopped the bus, found a record shop, and come back with the tapes, gave it to me. And this was a revelation, and for weeks and weeks I was in heaven listening to this. But my Aunt Mary gave me her copy of Malloy, Brady and Peoples, and I played the living daylights out of that. That was, I've never heard magic like it in my life. Two tracks in particular. Well, all of the tracks were brilliant. The Newport Lass and the Ramblin' Pitchfork. I still can't get over that as one of my favourite tracks of all time from any musician. I think Tommy was absolutely on fire, and there's something about Brady's accompaniment. I think he was a great lost tradition. Many other people would disagree very strongly with me in that, I'm quite sure. But I think Brady, when he went off to do his singer-songwriter thing, I think he was a massive loss to the accompaniment of Irish music. There was something he could do, in certain tunes especially. When we would go through the tune the first time, play your first part and your second part, and whatever he did, it was a very subtle change he did to the way he played the chords. The whole thing began to float. And it was as if all the musicians were levitating. They could just levitate the whole, it just came up to here and it floated there in front of you. And that's evident on a few of the tracks where, or on quite a few tracks where Paul Brady is accompanying. There was one particular tune, is it called the Clune, a reel, or the Doon reel. And Tommy played that in the key of C. And Tommy's version of that is extremely difficult to play, especially if you're going to try and play it the way that Tommy might have played it. Extremely difficult to play, and would require constant practice to stay on top of it. And that to me was a mind-blowing bit of playing. From the first I heard that, I knew this was going to be really tough to play, you know. But the Graf Spee, there's something in that there. There's great beauty to the way the Graf Spee was played on that album. There's just unimaginable joy in that tune. I could never get enough of it. The joy I would get from listening to it, the joy they must have felt when they played it.
Did you have a copy of the Cultist one?
I did with, well, the Go On Tommy, and the Green Hills of Tyrrell is on that, and there's a Strathspey, I forget the name of it, and the Boyne Hunt, I think he played after that. Yeah, we had that. Great playing. That's where Farewell to Erin had been played as an air and then gone into a reel, I believe. It's many years since I've heard that recording. It's many years.
They just always retain that magic, you know. And I know Dad often spoke about Matt. And he said how he was such a generous musician. And he said he's so generous. He said he leaves space for you to do your thing while he's doing his own thing. But he leaves so much space for you. And I think I don't know what Matt said the same about Dad, but Jesus, they were some duet, you know. They just had this instinct for playing together, you know, that you could hear the brilliance of both of them. But you could also hear the duet, you know. There was no ego taken over there, you know. It was such a perfect combination of people and musical skill.
Well, I just think there were two musicians who happened to be around Dublin around the same time. Matt, as I remember, was working in Aer Lingus as an aircraft mechanic. Tommy was in Dublin too. And again, it was this thing that was happening in Dublin. There was this community of musicians. And it was sort of like, it was a very, very intense social scene based around places like O'Donoghue's Pub and Slattery's, as I said. And we all seemed to congregate together. And there was a sort of a generation of us who were all in our early, sort of late teens, early 20s, into their 30s. And we were all really enjoying this sort of thing that was happening, because we'd gone from a situation of playing in a sort of an underground way to a way that was becoming sort of acceptable, and it was given us a freedom. And I suppose in some ways recognising the music as having a validity. And I do think that, and then, you know, musicians gravitate towards each other. I couldn't say why Tommy and Matt, but I just think it would have been a natural sort of a pull. And they obviously enjoyed it because the music was marvellous, you know, and it was a great chemistry between them and a great understanding between the way they played together. So it was kind of fiddle and flute playing at a very, very high level.
The Iron Man came about after he got sober. So he'd cut out alcohol completely. If he was quiet, I suppose he wasn't so quiet when he was actively drinking. And the troubles were very much ongoing. During the hunger strikes, our house was HQ in Clare for the making of banners and getting together and getting groups of people together, and they marched in Cusack Park all the time, which was a new pitch. So they were getting a good few games, you know, because it was one of the first of the big ones outside Croke Park or the cities, you know. So and they marched half time every match. They would march to the Flanua. You know, they were very actively involved. So he was very vocal back then. And I suppose had a lot of anger towards what was going on up the north. And, you know, I remember him telling us a story about his cousin's house in Derry. Her husband got killed in the Troubles and she had 2 teenage sons. And they were getting up to mischief, like, because they were teens. And there was a knock at the door one day and they came in and dug up her entire ground floor because they heard there was arms here, and left it like that. But it was their way of saying, you control your children or we'll do it for you. And he, like, the North affected him really, really deeply. And he was a man that always went up. He never stopped. He brought me up there 13. And we were playing up there when very few musicians would travel. And so then he stopped drinking, and then there was 5 years where Dad was like absolutely silent. And trying to learn how to cope with the reason he was medicating in the first place, trying to cope with that without the crutch of alcohol. I don't know, was he trying to figure out how he was going to do it, or was it just hanging on by his fingernails? Again, he never really spoke about difficulties in his life, or that he would speak about joys and that, but he would never speak about things he found hard. So the quiet, not the quiet man, the Iron Man came in the middle of that. So when I listened to that album, like, he would have rehearsed at home. He would have brought, it was an album, so he brought the album home. The player was borrowed, and we sat and listened to it 4 or 5 times. And I remember his analysis of it at the end was, too many of the key changes are the same, and you know, whereas I was listening to the music. And I think it's one of my favourite albums of his, because of the vulnerability that you hear in it, that he was actually living at the time. There's a change there into the is it from the chorus jig or into the chorus jig? And the very beginning of that, to this day, I mean, I listen to it like all his other albums, it was played on repeat. But I still listen to that change, and it just puts shivers up my spine. And it's that vulnerability, like, there's nothing like a man with a fiddle that can show his vulnerable side. You know, they say women love the lad with the kitten and all this kind of stuff. Oh, look, he's so vulnerable and he's not afraid to show it. But I think Dad did that with music. Not intentionally, I mean, he wasn't trying to lure you in or anything. But when he was vulnerable, you heard vulnerable. You know, sure, there's some great tunes on that album that, I mean, one thing that struck me after that was that people played the selections as he recorded them. You know, the only other instance I'd ever seen that was Caleb band music, because that's what they did. And outside of playing with the Kilfenoras, all the other sessions that I was involved in were, it was very much whatever you wanted to play after that tune. There was no one had set lists or selections they'd play together. But then I found that creeping in after that album. Maybe there were selections before he recorded them, I'm not 100% sure, but I decided that it was all Dad's doing, you know, because he's my dad.
What did you make of the Iron Man?
The Iron Man, well, 1985, I suppose. Here was me, new kid out in the block, going around every session I could get my hands on, and I quite often ended up in the company of Frankie Kennedy and Mairead Newany and Kieran Kern in those days. And I was travelling to everything. Thumbing lifts here and thumbing lifts there. I'd be thumbing off to the Ballyshannon Folk Festival or to the Fla and the Stole. I'd go everything possible, or up to maybe Colta's headquarters in Belgrave Square, and staying there for the weekend and playing music around the clock and whatnot. But this album came out. Yes, this is great, and I couldn't get off of it. I played it all day long, listening, and I learned that complete album off note for note. I knew every note that was played in that album, and I knew every chord and where it went and everything as well. I'm not a guitar player, and I couldn't play guitar, but I knew exactly what Dahi's Pole was doing. There's John Doherty's Reel, John Doherty's Fancy, and Brogan's Ferry. That stuck out. From the minute that Tommy's, the first note you hear there is the F sharp to start that tune, and that sticks out, and that's Tommy. That's just the tone. And the way, you could almost say that every note was a piece of music on its own. Every note. Well, I sort of have, I think Tommy was into great detail in the way even he would play one single note, because every note has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it has a certain duration, and all sorts of things can happen from, you know, it's just time, and time is relative, and all sorts of things can happen. You can vary a tone all sorts of ways from you get from here to here. And that F, they had some way of sliding into it and then increasing the depth of the tone and the volume at the same time, and then easing off near the end of it, and then we're away into the tune. And off we go. But that F, there's such, I think there's even in that one note, there's such beauty. But that was often the way. Tommy wouldn't just launch abruptly into a tune. He would, maybe the first note he would ease and maybe draw it out a wee bit, and then we're off. I've never heard him come to an abrupt stop on a tune either. Maybe once on the high part of the road, maybe a bit abrupt in places. But no, he seemed to play every note to get the squeeze as much value out of every note as it possibly could be squeezed out. But that was one of my favourite tracks, that John Doherty one. I think it's called, it's a Wajan Wara Walla War. I think it's called in some places. But there's two jigs there as well, Tell Her I Am and the chorus. And I was awful fond of those tunes. There's such sensitivity and gentleness in the way Tell Her I Am is played. Other than that, I couldn't describe why I like it, but I like it immensely. But there's something about the last track in that album, and I think that's the cherry on top of the cake, is O'Callaghan's and Scarta Glen. That's my favourite track on that album. That might surprise some people who might have expected me to say the Iron Man and William Marshalls or Kitty O'Shea or tunes like that. But that's my favourite track in that whole album. From He Goes Into O'Callaghan's, it just flows so beautifully. There's Daithí Sproul's accompaniment, say, for that last tune on the Iron Man is at Callaghan's and Scarta Glen, where he holds the minor fifth in the second part of Scarta Glen. That brings out the beauty of that part to a serious degree. Every collaborator had their strengths and weaknesses. Some might be, maybe somebody's not so hot in the key of C, and maybe somebody doesn't like jigs, or could be, but for various reasons. I tend to like them all, mostly. Quiet Glen, yeah. The Greenfields of the Glentown. And Tommy played that up, well, I suppose, as I said, he never played the same tune the same way twice, but there's a fair difference between the way he played it on this album than when he had done it on the previous recording. But that was one of my favourite tracks there, that and La Cosa Mulligan. Again, there's something about the way the accompaniment made you hear the tune better, which is, to my mind, what good accompaniment is about. A good accompanist will draw your ear to the music that's being played, rather than to how cool they are, or as certain accompanists might see themselves.
Well, I think it's been remarked on, generally that it's actually been put to Tommy as well on the occasional interview, that there was a feeling that that mid-70s was sort of, that I was laughing there during the Greenfields of Glentown, because you really need somebody to come in and say, "Come on, Tommy!" and while you're playing it, just to get that authentic. So it was just the feeling of so much music there to come out, and the attack and the sort of youthful, that vigor, and really going for it. Thing that's just left so many unforgettable moments, like the Bothy Band 75 album, The High Part of the Road, the exciting session with one of Ireland's leading fiddle players. That was Tommy at full tilt. Now, lots of people have said that after that his music sort of, the subsequent albums, the music sort of settled down a bit, and I suppose it became, there was less of that, all-out attack and more, but probably more, a lot of thought. They're all exceptional in their own way. Like The High Parlour was probably one of the greatest fiddle albums ever made, you know, for definite. But the other fiddle albums as well, like they're exceptional. And but he said himself, I was just reading an interview he did with Fiddler magazine there, that you know, somebody said, you know, your playing got a bit camera, you know, as after that, the mid-70s. He said, yeah, well, it's probably the journey from inebriation to sobriety was one thing, and probably as life went on, he said that he found, you know, sort of areas of peace within himself that it mightn't have been there, you know, back in those days. And also, I think he also said about performance that performance anxiety, you know, played a part in it as well. I suppose when you're in your 20s and you're indestructible and you're going for everything, hell for leather, you just probably don't even think about performance anxiety. But I know that he was somebody that I never saw the stage as a natural environment for Tommy, although he made it seem natural. And I would say, yeah, definitely the music changed and became different, but no less brilliant.